know. I think we're just ruminating about this kind of an ebb and flow of some of the ideas, perhaps some of the aspirations that we might have for Miracle Mile.
Well, I have a question for you, because you sort of documented the street. I have this impression that at one time the boulevard itself was a much more active commercial place than it is today. And I've lived in this neighborhood since 1965. And it always feels empty on Wilshire Boulevard. Even though there are big buildings, there are all kinds of storefronts, there are many businesses, it never teems. It just never seems to have reached some sort of critical mass where you can go on to, you know, Broadway and downtown even today, and it's busy with people. And I'm wondering, what is it?
What is it? And I also wonder to what extent this idea that Miracle Mile was teeming is almost like historically aspirational. It's a nostalgia for a time that most of us don't remember. Reading Richard Longstreth and some of the other sort of discussions about the development of linear malls in Los Angeles, I also wonder to what extent this the depopulation of some of these areas, like Miracle Mile, happened primarily after World War II. So perhaps Miracle Mile had a height of teemingness into the 1940s or 1950s, and then it kind of just leveled off and dissipated.
I wonder if it ever did, or if it always was kind of the way it is now. Because I think those of us who live here keep asking ourselves, well, how come we don't have a good restaurant? You know, how come there isn't just a little kind of gourmet food store? Because clearly the residents in this neighborhood want that, and yet it never seems to crop up in the obvious place. Maybe the rents are too high. It's
somebody's nodding their head, so maybe you're right. The rents are too high for a restaurant. So let's think about.
But what else is there? You can go to a beauty supply store. That doesn't seem to me to be the sort of, you know, if you're a city planner, of course you don't want to shut those things down. And it is true that all great boulevards have, as you say, an ebb and flow over time. You could look at Hollywood Boulevard, which was down on its heels probably for 30 years before it made its present revival. But I look at Wilshire and I keep asking myself, how come it's not happening here? What are the elements that are missing to spark that? And I don't know what it is. You've got Ace Gallery there, you know, you'd think.
Also, you know, it seems to me though, obviously there must be a certain level of teaming, because one of the reasons why this is historically significant is the success of all these downtown retailers who came out here. They wouldn't have kept coming, whether it was Coulter's and the May Company, if the customers weren't here. And you talk about in your book how A.W. Ross did that map. Explain that, how he measured the distance.
Well, the story is, and he said that much later, that he kind of, you know, looked around at the development around what was LA then, and he said within a 4 or 5 mile radius there is Hollywood, there is downtown, so he thought that it would be in a car-bound culture, and by the 1920s there were already, I think, LA had the most cars per person than anywhere in the world. He said, you know, this is a place to start developing retail, because there are all these people with income who were living within, you know, an easy car drive rather than them having to go to downtown. So that was supposedly his calculation. I was wondering to what extent he was also influenced by the residential developments that were going westward from what were city limits, and, you know, Beverly Hills and others. But he said, you know, I drew a 4 mile radius and this was the location and let's go. So he can be interpreted as essentially creating something that is artificial, and maybe in its artificiality it wasn't quite what he envisioned. Then I don't think he was able to implement everything he wanted. Nobody can. Even Robert Moses couldn't. In some ways, that's probably a good thing that he couldn't, right? That's why we had
Right.
Jane Jacobs. But he had, he seems to have had grandiose visions that eventually ended up, he was supportive, I believe, of what we call mixed-use development and public transit-oriented development, although that was not his original vision. So his thinking seems to have also progressed. I mean, he was in it for the money, of course, he was a developer. I guess he was also in some ways a civically minded person. He must have really loved the city of Los Angeles.
Well, those aren't mutually exclusive.
Not necessarily,
You know,
yes.
I mean, there are good examples. Guys like Ira Yellen
Yes.
contributed a lot to LA, and it's not
Out of the realm of the possible to have civic mindedness and
That's right.
business acumen.
Absolutely. I mean, I think these things it's very difficult to plot out LA and to understand it, partly because it's a very dynamic city. It doesn't have, it's not limited in the way. Manhattan is limited. You got only so much island, 8 miles of island, and then sorry folks, you're in the drink. So it's an act of compression. In addition to which the geology dictated a great deal of how the city was going to grow. Where there were outcroppings of bedrock, you could go up, and where there weren't, the city is low. And if you look at Manhattan in cross-section, you immediately see that. For Los Angeles, it's a completely different reality. I don't know, what is the length of the coastline? And where do you begin? Where do you begin? Do you begin at Point Dume, the way that the Olmsted brothers did in their 1930 plan of parks, playgrounds, and beaches, and go all the way down to Palos Verdes? In fact, out to Catalina? Yeah. What is the definition of Los Angeles? And the problems that the city confronted, or the constraints, were the LA River, which would overflow its boundaries on a fairly regular basis, and when there were severe floods in 1936, 38, and 39, I guess was the last one. It was channelized, so which opened up vast tracts of land that bequeathed to us places like Lakewood, which is a planned community, but everything on either side of the river, you could just develop it. You could just keep going out flat, which unfortunately argues against a central, unified, downtown that also confers upon the city an identity. So, you get these sort of stretches like the Miracle Mile, or, the other one that comes to mind, of course, is Larchmont Village, which is another, which I believe really emerged because the 3rd Street trolley ended right there. So it gave it, you could get there, and it became a natural destination. And the city that area didn't grow up until after World War I. So I think it's very tricky in the kind of context of how LA could easily spread. It could spread along Huntington's railroad routes, his trolley routes, the red car and the yellow car routes. And as you say, even if we had implemented the Olmsted, and Bartholomew plan of these landscape parkways, perhaps that would have just been another way of aiding and abetting this kind of sprawl, or whatever you want to call it, that makes areas like this very, very difficult to maintain as having sufficient density and also sufficient kind of identity to really become a kind of minor civic center or minor important part of the city. I don't know, though, because Hollywood kind of has done it.
It has, but Hollywood also has, we have some nostalgia tourism in this area.
Not like Hollywood, though.
Not like Hollywood, and I think it's it seems to me maybe more concentrated around the market, farmers market.
Yes.
More than anything. Perhaps around the cultural institutions here, particularly LACMA. I mean, witness my daughter. But this is not a civic center, it's a commercial center. It's not both. I think it's particularly a commercial center. Maybe there is a difference there. I don't know. But I have a question, actually. Given that we were talking about these harebrained ideas for LA that are in the exhibition, and I'm sure there were probably some that you decided not to include because the exhibition only has so much space. Are there some that you actually wish would have happened? Just
For the Miracle Mile or in general?
in general.
Oh, sure. I mean, I go through this a lot because I'm constantly walking people through the exhibition, and I'm at the 70-30 threshold, but it may get even higher than that, where I look at 70% of the projects that are in the show and I go, good thing those weren't built. So I'm down to only, a third. And I think it keeps getting to be fewer and fewer. But I mean, and partly that's, you look at something and you realize it might have been right for when it was suggested, but it's no longer right for now. Exactly. But there are a few. There's John Lautner's Nature Center for Griffith Park, which is still a really terrific building. It's a building that feels kind of eternally modern. It's appropriate for its site. It would have been built where the old abandoned zoo is. It was built into the landscape itself. His use of materials, as is true with Lautner every time, are really ingenious. It was a thin form concrete shell in the shape of birds' wings with these really beautiful slanting glass panels that float off the building. It's an exquisite building, and the terrible joke is that the plans are sitting at the Getty Research Institute. Every single page of those plans was done. The architectural set is there, the structural set is there, all the soil science is there, every single review you could possibly go through is there, all the grading, everything.
Almost at the point.
You could check that out of the Getty Research Institute, walk over to the spot in Griffith Park, which is still undeveloped, and start building today. And I think the city would benefit from that. My colleague Sam Lubell thinks that they should have done LAX and which is this enormous glass dome.
Is it the one that's floating out in the water?
No, that's an Anthony Lumsden hotel that would have replaced POP, which is now long gone, Pacific Ocean Park. No, the LAX is the gigantic dome that would have become a single concourse for all of the airlines, and that's from 1952. And I think what Sam likes about that project, other than it's very exciting, you would have felt like, ooh, you have arrived in the modern space age, the age of real air travel, if they'd built that building, as opposed to the LAX we have today, where nobody wants to go. But I think that in his view, having a building like that would have raised the level of expectation for architecture and design in LA in general.
It would have had a kind of an effect.
A ripple effect. Exactly. And I think that in a lot of ways, that's the lesson you can learn even from bad projects or projects that feel very dated, that when you revisit them, they can show you that first of all, that possibilities remain, that we can still do really thoughtful and good work. But then they show you, okay, well, these are the challenges of those things. I'll give you the example from the Miracle Mile, because little by little, by being around it a lot, I've come to like the Rem Koolhaas proposal much more than I liked it originally. It's a funny thing, because originally I thought, if you know the project, it was to tear down the Pereira buildings, to leave intact the Bruce Goff Japanese pavilion, and to build a single unified structure, like the size of 4 football fields, facing Wilshire Boulevard, with this tent-like roof made out of a polymer plastic that is inflated and actually would have let in natural light without having any UV. So it was a really radical scheme, which you would expect from Rem Koolhaas. It had problems that were terribly unresolved, which is once you got below that first level of this beautiful, naturally illuminated, museum space, you had an enormous cavern. So it had its problems, but the more I'm around that, the more excited I am by the way that he treated the roof. That by itself, it had a kind of whimsy and a feeling of movement that I think is very Los Angeles, and it's not the kind of movement that you see in Disney Hall. It's different. It's more spacious, kind of more giving, I think. And I think we missed a real opportunity. And yes, there is a sense of loss about the Pereira buildings. I as a child, I ran up and down those staircases. I can't tell you how many times. Played around before they shut off the fountains. It was a great.
And it opened onto Wilshire Boulevard, so there was.
It did. Exactly. At least it said that the boulevard had some importance. Now, it wasn't right up against the boulevard, which is probably really where you want to build a museum to keep the wall of the street activated. You want the building and the things going on inside the building to always be in a constant exchange. One of the problems with the Zumthor thing is it totally turns its back on the street because first of all, it's elevated, 30 feet above the boulevard, and you've got this dark kind of mysterious plaza space. I don't even know what it is with these odd, it's a troublesome proposal, I think. And then what it looks for, it looks to the park at the backside, which is going to gobble up. It's going to eat up a third of the park, no problem. And then put the restaurant and the tchotchke store and the one book they want to sell you facing the back. So that I think is very bad. But to return, it's funny, you get close to a project, the more you look at it, the more you kind of live with it, the more you can see, okay, well, here's something that if they had done it, it might have actually been good for the city. And I think in general for the Miracle Mile, we're very fortunate to have the museum there. I think it's helped give the area identity. I think it draws people in a really healthy way. I just wish it spilled out more from that to affect the other institutions and businesses in the immediate area.
It seems to me that maybe in Los Angeles, and I don't know that LA is unique, there is this issue of having places of destination. The Grove is a place of destination. And when I lived in Park La Brea and my daughter was young, I let her walk from Park La Brea to the Grove by herself. I mean, I don't know what she was, 11 or something, I don't know. I was shaking in my boots, but I let her go. People can deride the Grove, and of course I can too, because it's just a shopping mall. But I do remember feeling that, as a destination, given how close we lived, it was okay to let a small child, whatever, walk and cross the street. So the Grove is a destination, aside from, my own feelings. And LACMA is a destination, and perhaps some of the areas around it. But Miracle Mile in and of itself, I'm not sure is a destination to the extent that there are people living around it and in it now. For those people, presumably it fulfills the commercial needs, service needs, but it is not a destination itself. And I do think we struggle when we think about revitalizing something like Miracle Mile with the idea of what if it becomes just a destination? So it becomes like Hollywood, like the stretch of Hollywood Boulevard, which in many ways is a destination. And recently I went to the Hollywood Bowl, so you get out of the metro on Hollywood Boulevard. Like these masses of people, and imagine living around there, being, living, close by. We always struggle with this. Do we really want this, or do we really want to have something that it's a destination for us? And what is the mix? And is it an architectural mix? And is this a business mix? If we have some grand piece of sculpture like, the Bean in Millennium Park, in some sort of a context.
Well, we do. We have the levitated mass.
Mass, yes, we do, which is not a work of destination, interestingly enough. Although
It's
I
a
remember
flop.
when it opened,
Right.
there were a lot of people, and everybody in my family rather dislikes it, even though they might like Michael Heitzer. I'm probably the only one who likes it, so I think it's a destination, oddly enough. And if you
You
ever
may be
see a
the
person,
only one.
Probably, if you see a person walking underneath it all the time, it might be me. But you know, I understand the issues with this. I'm not going to defend this to the very end, and perhaps it will change too. But okay. But the idea was to make it also a destination, this kind of a wow effect. And let's say we have, what are we going to have? We'll have this bubble behind on the north side of the May Company,
Yes.
right? That's going to
The
be
Renzo
a variety.
piano, yeah.
The Renzo, which is very different from the Renzo piano
Very
buildings that he built, both here and elsewhere. But let's say we'll have this bubble, and it will be a destination. It will be very much compressed. I mean, I don't know how to make Miracle Mile a destination, and what would it take for somebody who lives near it to make it a destination? I mean, you obviously have interests, you have interests, but do the neighbors have any interest? Do they want to maybe?
I think that, you know,
Maybe we aspire too much for the residents too.
it may be. I don't.